available. I'm pleased to have Alex join us. He's a relative newcomer to Washington County. He can share a little bit of background on himself before he gives us an update on what's been going on with supportive housing services. That's the main focus of our time together today. It's a placeholder that we've decided we want to keep every month, just given the amount of activity that's going on in housing and homelessness. And we thought it was, the leadership team last week decided this would be a good opportunity to get current on what's going on from the county's perspective. So Alex, a question for you. Do you want me to drive on the presentation or do you want to do it yourself?
Oh, I can do it. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, then I'm going to make sure that you've got the ability to do that. So you should now be able to share your screen.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Devin. I work at Washington County at the Supportive Housing Services. Before I even begin, I want to apologize to Brian and Bridget and Kim and Marcia, because this is probably a rerun for you all. You've probably heard some aspect of this presentation 100 times. And I know I talked to you all individually, so I apologize for any duplicative information or boredom you might have while I update the rest of the group. As Glenn said, I've been at Washington County since April 19th of this year with the Supportive Housing Services team. I was the second staff, so brand new team. Before I came to Washington County, I worked down in Los Angeles County. Please don't hold that against me. But while I was down there, I worked on housing and homeless programs for the city and the county of Los Angeles. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to work with a great provider network and a much more manageable homeless response system, where I think we can actually make a real dent and see actual change on the street level versus what I'm used to, which is an uphill battle where you never see change. So grateful to be here and grateful to have an opportunity for us to hit functional zero homelessness in Washington County over the next couple of years. And let me share my screen. Let me know if you all can see that. That would be wonderful. Okay. And I'm going to open up my little window so I can see you while I'm talking, because I'm neurotic that way and it helps me to see you when I'm talking. All right. So as you probably, most of you know, the Supportive Housing Services Program was a tax initiative on high income earners that was voted on last year. And it is projected to include about $350 million a year when the program is fully launched, and that includes services through the Tri-County area. For Washington County, the projected income is supposedly or allegedly going to be about $85 million a year when it caps off. This first year, the projection was that we would get 22 million in Washington County, but I've also heard other projections that it might be upwards of 50. We won't know till April. So at this point, Washington County essentially took a loan out to itself for $22 million to cover the cost of services this first year until we get the funds from Metro. As we build out this homeless response system or this housing response system, it will be a much larger system of care that is essentially meant to be very strategic and all-encompassing for the needs of our houseless neighbors in Washington County. So there's many building blocks to the system of care. And so I'll go through some of the building blocks, and some of them are existing building blocks that come through ESG funds through the state, or continuum of care funds that come from the Fed, and then the funds through the Supportive Housing Services. So many different funding sources that will all kind of come together. And the idea is that they would not be siloed, but essentially braided to create this larger system of care. So Within the supportive housing services, we have, oh, and at any point, please feel free to interrupt me. This is a smaller group, so I think it can be a little more organic. I can see you all, so if you want to raise your hand or whatever, I can stop and ask questions at any point. So the launching the supportive housing services system of care at first will include a few of the essential building blocks. So that one would be housing case management services. And I'll get a little bit more into housing case management services, but those are essentially voucher-based case management for high needs households that have been homeless for a considerable period of time and have disabilities. And each of those caseloads will include the long-term rental assistance, which we call ARLA. The also part of building the system of care would be modernizing the Community Connect system, doing capacity building grants for culturally specific providers in the community to build them up and give them what they need to, essentially utilize government contracts, inclement weather shelters, emergency shelters, bridge shelters, which are non-congregate shelters, usually purchased motels. Employment programs, housing navigators embedded into the existing system, youth transitional housing programs, disability benefits programs, landlord liaison programs, recovery reentry programs for households leaving different systems, and other supportive and affordable housing initiatives. It'll also include emergency rent assistance, outreach workers, rapid rehousing, as well as the existing shelter plus care and VASH system. So basically a very comprehensive system of care that will have services needed for any flavor of household that walks into the system that needs help. So essentially there should be a shoe for all feet that walk in through the front door, or I would say a sock for all feet, because I love giving our homeless neighbors socks when I go out, because everybody likes dry socks. So year one through the supportive housing services program, the commitment was to house 500 high needs households. Metro calls them population A. It is essentially an expanded definition of what HUD would call chronic homelessness. Ours is just a little broader and more encompassing, as well as additional 500 households that are lower acuity, which they call population B. This could be households that are newly homeless, have been homeless for under a year, as well as some preventative services so people don't fall into housing. The commitment also was to ensure that there was 100 year-round shelter beds and sustained winter shelter capacity for year one. The larger program goal, which we intend or project to hit within 3 years, would be 1,665 supportive housing placements, 250 additional year-round beds, and all outcomes are essentially meant to advance equity within the system in multiple layers. Housing case management services. This was our first launch, say my baby. And so we currently have 16 providers that will be providing this service. Each organization has between 2 and 3 housing case managers. Each case manager has caseloads that do not exceed 20. Some are a little bit lower depending on need, but they would never exceed 20 participants. So we're creating a large level of support for every household that needs housing. So it isn't just about getting them into housing and then walking away. These 20 people to each case manager essentially have long-term retention services. So once you're in housing, historically, once you're in housing, the work ends. We all know that once you enter housing, actually, that's when the work begins. So we're trying to create a network that provides that long-term support because essentially most of our households do not have trouble coping with some of the basic living skills. And we want to ensure that they have those supports for when crises occur, they have support so they don't lose their housing. These housing case management services essentially cover things like outreach, housing navigation, housing retention. Oh, I'm getting pinged. And long-term retention support. And so, like I said earlier, the goal is to have 500 placements this year. We knew that organizations were all going to struggle with their own capacity and large growth this year. So we contracted out about 700 slots this year, hoping that if we overcommit, we would perform to the level of reaching the 500. So we already went into this with an assumption that there was going to be struggles, there was going to be growing pains, there was going to be challenges within this larger growth of the provider network. So we overshot the mark. So aim for the stars and hope to hit the moon, essentially, is what we're going for within this program. All right, let me go to the next slide here. Sorry, too many windows open. The long-term rental assistance program, which is connected to each of these housing case managers, is essentially a vouchering program. We call it ARLA for short. The tenant would pay 28.5% of their income towards rent. There is no minimum income requirement, so households that have zero income would pay zero of their income essentially towards the rent. The housing authority would pay the rest. Somebody only had, I don't know, $200, $300 a month, they would only pay like about $60 for their rent each month. So it's a sliding scale only at 28.5%. And like I said earlier, we are aiming to hit 500 households, but we overextended, hoping to hit that number. And access to all these vouchers is through the HCMS program. Next, bridge shelters. Bridge shelters are great. Bridge shelters are essentially non-congregate settings where households can focus their attention on the work on finding housing. So this would be for families or chronically homeless households. We currently have 102 new units within Washington County system. So the Econo Lodge has 60. I would have flagged that 10 of those are respite shelter rooms for households that are COVID positive, where they can stay safe for 10 days without having to leave the room. All those rooms are provided with, TV and cable and food and a dedicated smoking area, so that those households won't leave essentially while they're COVID positive, and can spend that stay and then move on safely. And we've at this point had pretty good, reasonable enrollment numbers on positive households in Washington County. So I think we're really lucky in Washington County that a lot of folks are getting vaccinated, and so we're having lower need for those units. Those respite shelter units. All of them serve single adults except for the Forest Grove Inn. Hey, Brian, that's run by Centro Cultural. At that site, they will also be serving families with minor children. That site also is a little unique in that they will also be serving lower acuity households, and that is essentially to ensure that we are not screening out migrant farm workers and other culturally specific, culturally needed households that are unique to that population. So really enjoyed working with Centro Cultural and creating a very trauma-informed, culturally sensitive location over there. And I'm excited to see how it all rolls out. All right, Community Connect Modernization. As if you've been in the system for a while, you know that the Community Connect system needed to get our households within housing. Historically has been a very large, clunky, comprehensive assessment that was only done by about 30 assessors through the system. That was a system that was needed with limited resources. We don't have limited resources anymore. We have a huge influx of resources. So the inflow for the housing programs needed to be modernized, reformed, adjusted, changed to be more efficient, effective, as well as be more equitable and and who can access services. So we started that process back in May. We did slews of community feedback sessions. We had whiteboarding sessions with outreach workers, with housing navigators, with case managers, with retention specialists, with folks with lived experience. A lot of people got to put their input in on the design and the questions, and it was approved by the COC board last month. And we're currently launching trainings to allow all these new assessors in the system. So now almost anyone can do assessments and get their people connected to the Community Connect. The way the new modernization is being adjusted is we took this large assessment of 100 questions, and we broke it down into 4 very small assessments. And these 4 small assessments are done at different phases in a household's journey into housing. So the first assessment is the access and eligibility assessment. It's 24 questions, and it's just to screen what you're eligible for and get you connected to a housing program. Once you get connected to a housing program, they do the phase 2 assessment. This is an assessment that includes a tenant screening report and focuses on all of the barriers that a household might have in entering housing. The goal of this assessment is to prioritize project-based units as they become available for households that have higher needs, as well as in the future bringing on a legal services provider to assist when households have other legal barriers to help them find housing, so that they can provide services like expungements and things like that to help households find their units. After a household moves into the unit, we do the thing called the phase 3 assessment. Phase 3 assessment focuses on all of the needs a household might have to live in stable housing. So this could be legal, this could be employment, this could be education, this could be behavioral health, substance abuse. This could be other social supports that a household needs, like spiritual support, churches, synagogues. It could be 12-step programs. It could be a whole, veritable cornucopia of other supportive services a household might need. And this information will essentially get put into HMIS, and then we will help match households to all of these ancillary resources. So we're expanding the idea of Community Connect beyond just housing, but to also include all of those supports a household might need. Last but not least, I would say, is the phase 4 assessment. Phase 4 assessment is done after a household has been housed for 6 months. And this assessment is basically to see if we put the household in the right housing program. We want to ensure that people that were put in a housing program, that if they need a higher level of assistance or a lower level of assistance or just a different level of assistance, they have the opportunity to be, they have the opportunity to be connected or matched to the appropriate housing program later. So we wanted to make sure that there was flexibility in housing programs so that everybody's in the right one that meets their needs. And you never really know when you put somebody in a housing program if it's the right one. But you have a much better idea after they've been in the unit for 6 months. That's when behavioral things change. That's when all of the issues might come up and bubble up. That's when some of the strengths are going to come up and bubble up. And we want to ensure that people are in the right housing program. Oh, covering a lot. Okay, winter shelter. Winter shelter is, I would say, coming together remarkably beautifully, frankly. The goal this year was to have 150 dedicated winter shelter beds from November 15th through March 15th. At this moment, we have 187. And the beautiful thing is that we have all sorts of flavors of winter shelter this season. So not just the traditional non-congregate settings that we've normally had. In Tigard, we'll have 20 beds, and Beaverton will have 30 beds. In Hillsborough at the Cloverleaf, we'll have 50 beds. Those include bunk beds, which we at the county got. So that's 100 non-congregate beds for adults. We will also have 44 motels for families with minor children or pregnant families that they can access during the winter shelter season. And then our work with Project Homeless Connect will also have 38 motel rooms that we will focus on putting folks that are medically fragile, have higher needs that might not be a good fit for a non-congregate or a congregate setting. So many different flavors. And so access to these winter shelter beds will begin in multiple phases. November 1st, we will have an online portal that will be available to case managers, outreach workers, discharge planners throughout the system, and they will be able to go onto this online portal, answer 7 questions about the household, and have them prioritized for a winter shelter bed. On November 10th, it will be launched to the community. And so the community won't be accessing the winter shelter portal online. The general community will have access to the Community Connect phone line, where they can call in, be screened, and then put in a winter shelter. So the idea behind this phased approach was to give us, the provider network, 10 days to prioritize all the households we are currently working with. So there's a whole bunch of families that are on wait lists. There's all these folks on wait lists. There's encampments that are closing down in Hillsborough and in Forest Grove and in other places. So we want to ensure that we're really prioritizing those households that are currently being worked with. So when the winter shelter phone line opens on November 10th, we might have already filled all of the beds through our larger provider network. I don't know yet. We'll find out. But the idea was to be much more strategic this year, much more focused, and allowing us to really decide who gets in those beds early on, so that yeah, we want to prioritize. We want to be strategic. I just said that, so I'm repeating myself. The Homeless Plan Advisory Committee expansion. So there is work on expanding the HPAC to create community oversight and accountability structures for the Supportive Housing Services Program. This is something that's currently being developed, but essentially the idea is a higher level of accountability and transparency through the county to the community partners at large, so that larger decisions are not made in a vacuum, and folks know what decisions are being made, what directions are going, and feedback is being incorporated. I'd say I'm very, very proud to say that I think we've done a pretty darn good job at listening to community feedback, listening to proposals we've taken to the group. They've given us feedback, and the county, I believe, has been pretty good at pivoting, adjusting, modifying, and being nimble to the needs the community is bringing up. So this is just another phase in that, to ensure a higher level of accountability. Oh, what are we working on now? We're working on another level of accountability, and that is our quarterly report to Metro. So we're currently building out this report. It will include outward-facing dashboards and other accountability measures that the community can see. So, I would say in the next few months, there will be a lot of outward-facing dashboards that you can see: enrollments, placements, spending. How are we doing as a community? Where are we struggling and where are we thriving? And so the Metro update also is going to the board on November 9th. And then the report is due to Metro on November 15th. I would say, due to this first quarter of launch, the vast majority of the information we'll be sharing is how the provider network has been expanded, and how much funds we've allocated out the door, which I believe at this point is about $11 million in programming that Supportive Housing Services has put out the door in about 5 months, which is remarkably fast, considering there was not a structure of any sort before. We're also doing lots of community engagement. I would say anytime a new shelter is going to be opened, thought of, talked about, there's many phases of community engagement and feedback. I would say my hope is that over time, these community engagement sessions will also incorporate a lot more community members that are in support of these programs launching. It seems that a lot of these community feedback sessions at the point are very NIMBY-ish. And so, I would say a lot of times we have to show up with a shield to protect ourselves from some of the feedback. But I'm hoping that over time, there will be more support from the community and the work we're doing. And that over time, a lot of the community members that are pushing back will see that we're getting positive results for these programs that are being launched. Oh, and we're also creating good neighbor agreements with a lot of these shelters with the community, and that level of accountability. All right, that is a whole lot of information. I know I blasted through it really quick. I know that Glenn had brought up capacity building, which I apologize, there was not a slide for. So essentially, the capacity building structure at this point started with us giving capacity building grants to organizations that self-certified as culturally responsive organizations. So this first round of culturally responsive organizations that got contracting would be Urban League, would be Enistar, would be Centro Cultural, and would be IRCO, Immigration and Refugee Network, community. I hope you know what I mean. Too many acronyms. And the next phases of this, and that capacity building grant, it basically, to start off, includes a $50,000 yearly grant for 3 years. And that is to help organizations with capacity building needs, such as, I don't know, it could be anything from an HR person to a drop-in center site to rewriting their policies and procedures. It has a lot of flexibility, and it's really intended to help these culturally responsive organizations build up their infrastructure so that they can be, an effective part of this larger provider network. The next phase is a tri-county partnership that is currently being developed. So there's a lot of work where we're partnering with our neighbors in Clackamas County and in Multnomah County to have alignment with things that make sense. And so there's going to be future building out of capacity building between this tri-county area partnership. A lot of other really great things are happening with our partners, our neighboring counties, and I'm bragging essentially to say that we have been leading the way in Washington County on a lot of the things we're doing, from quarterly reports to reforming the system to new housing programs to how we track data to how we're becoming more trauma informed. We're going to be relaunching the RFPQ for more providers in December. That essentially is another tri-county partnership. They saw how we did it. They were all jealous of how we did it. And now we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it with all 3 counties as a partnership. So a lot of this work that we're doing in Washington County is being emulated in other counties, which is, I would just say, one of the greatest compliments you could have is being emulated. So very exciting. I could say the next phase in programming that we will be looking at is to start rapid rehousing programming through Washington County. So we launched this HCMS for this high needs populations, but there's a whole bunch of lower needs households that are entering homelessness. So the next big push is rapid rehousing programs, and essentially ensuring that anybody who walks through any front door, regardless of how long they've been houseless or where their income levels are, can get connected to a housing program. I would say the one caveat to all of this is the system is going to be growing based off of providers' infrastructure. And so I know that there is a desire and a need that everybody wants us to move as quickly as possible. But I would say we all need to take into account that there is a very large provider network that is expanding at a very, very rapid rate. And they're all trying to do it in a way that is meaningful and helpful. So it will take time to build this network out, and it will take a level of patience with the community, knowing that, hiring is, we're at a staffing shortage across the country. And so even though we're giving the providers high salary rates for these entry-level positions at very good livable wages, that it'll still take time to hire all these folks, train all these folks, and really get some traction in the system. But it feels good. It feels good at the pace we're moving right now. We're moving pretty darn quick, considering this didn't exist in April. And on that note, I know I talked really fast. So I'd like to open the floor for questions or an open discussion or any feedback. And maybe, I don't know, Glenn, if you want to help field that with me, that'd be wonderful.
Happy to do that. Thank you so much for this update, Alex. Really appreciate it. There was a specific question regarding the Comfort Inn near the fairgrounds. I don't know if you know anything about it. It was an early shelter, and Kimberly is asking, is it empty? What are the plans? Do you know anything?
Yeah, it is empty. And I would say that at this point, there isn't any plans. And if you would ask why is there no plans for the Comfort Inn? I would say that the owner of that building doesn't actually own the land. And so there's, as we looked at growing infrastructure for other affordable housing measures and things like that, we want to be strategic that we're not putting a bunch of money into a location that essentially there's limited timeframes in which it's available. So at this moment, it doesn't look like it's a financially a good decision to create low income housing at that site, because like I said, we don't own the land.
You don't have site control.
Exactly. And so, doing large changes to a building that we might only have for 5 years doesn't always seem like the best bet. It is also really, really large, and might exceed a location to have best practices. So, a good shelter site, you're looking at about 50 beds. Once you exceed 50 beds or units, the quality of service diminishes very, very rapidly. And it just becomes harder to control and handle and create good outcomes. So there is a sweet spot, essentially, when you're looking at shelter and larger services. And I would say that's between about 40 and 60, where you can really have good site control, good case management, good infrastructure, and not create too much of a waves in the community.
Katie Riley has asked, what is the connection with mental health needs? Are there services being provided to support mental health?
Yeah, so I mean, we're going at a multi-pronged approach with this. So essentially, all these services that are being offered do not require, we're looking for more people with lived experience to really provide these services. I mean, we welcome our MSWs and our LCSWs and all of that, those wonderful licensed staff, but we're also really focusing heavily on people with lived experience that want to be caseworkers for these programs. And then we're providing a lot of trainings, behavioral health trainings, de-escalation trainings, lots of trainings where we don't have to bring law enforcement in for people that are having a crisis or a mental health moment or a substance abuse moment. And then we're also partnering with the Department of Health and Human Services to create better bridges and connections to households based off of their needs. Also, like some of these larger locations, like the Econo Lodge, there is a behavioral health specialist that works at that site during the week. So a couple different avenues. It will grow over time. The goal is, though, that when somebody moves into housing out of shelter, that they will have very easy access to substance abuse, mental health services as needed. The partnership would be a twofold partnership in that sense, where we want to give assessing capabilities as well to our substance abuse providers and our mental health providers, so that they have an access to get their folks into housing programs, and that us at the housing side have access to get our households into their programs as needed. So trying to create this symbiotic relationship between behavioral health providers and housing providers. And so that's currently being built out about at the same pace as everything else.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Marcia asked about when providers are going to have some additional information about getting access to the online portal for accessing shelter beds.
Great question, Marcia. I have a person designing that flyer right now because I cannot find my way around an Adobe program for the life of me. And I'm hoping that I will have 2 one-pagers that will be available early next week. One one-pager will go to the provider network, and it'll have the steps and the link to use the portal. And then one one-pager will go on the county website, and we would blast out to the general community, and that would have information on winter shelters. So it's tight. we're a lot of moving parts, so we're cutting it really close here. And I'm creating MOUs with legal counsel to ensure we can share data between the county and Community Connect. So all that stuff is getting built out, and I'm hoping early next week the provider network will have access to that information so you can all be strategic in enrolling your households on November 1st.
Great.
I wish it was
Katie's
moving a little
asking-
faster, so I apologize.
Yeah, no worries. Katie's asking about homeless adolescents. I assume she's wondering if there's a specific focus or outreach for homeless kids.
It depends on the age. So for winter shelter, we're partnering with Boys and Girls AIDS, so there will be access to some beds for I would say unaccompanied minors. It's a little different way that structure is being built. And then Bridget's team over at Home Plate will be working with the transitional age youth. And then at this point, Family Promise at Tualatin Valley will be working with families with minor children and pregnant. And so a couple different avenues to get with our adolescents. I also had a really great meeting yesterday at the Beaverton Resource Center. And so we're going to be leveraging a few of their staff to do assessments for other households that might walk in through those front doors. So part of this expansion or growth is also our openness to partner with other resource centers through the county if they want to leverage staff to do assessments to get people connected, so they're not relying on the housing response system to do those assessments. We want to remove those bottlenecks. So any organization that can leverage a staff person to do an assessment, we'll pay for the HMIS license, we'll train them up, we'll give them the tools they need, and hopefully that will create higher levels of inflow.
Great. Cole's asking how much money has been released to providers so far. And Cole, I don't know if you mean committed, like contracted out, or actually spent.
I just am wondering, Alex, if you can restate it. I think you said, I thought I heard 250,000, but I might have missed that part when you were talking about it.
We've allocated out about $11 million in contracting at this point in 5 months.
That's awesome. That's why I wanted to ask, because I totally missed the actual figure. Thank you.
I think
it's about 5 for the shelter system and about 6 for the housing response system at this point. And so I don't think we'll have a problem allocating out all the funds. I think that year one is going to be, since there's such a large level of expansion, I don't think that we'll spend anywhere near what we allocate, and that's okay. I know it's going to take a little time for the provider network to get some traction because, like I said earlier, this is just a huge level of growth in the system. So everybody's kind of in their weird teenage angst. My foot's too big. I got acne and my voice is changing phases within the provider network. And so that'll take a little while to grow through.
Right on. Alex, can I ask one more question? And this is really for the benefit of partners in Clackamas County who are trying to figure out what the heck's going on with the RFP process. Excited to hear that Washington County will be leading probably the RFP queue for the region, because you all did a great job for Washington County. Can you talk a little bit about how that's starting to shape up?
I mean, it's getting written right now. And there's a weekly meeting between the Tri-County partners on collaborating that. So that information will probably go out in the next 45 days or so. And it'll be fashioned pretty similar to how it was done in Washington County. It'll be sent out through the three counties. And so Jess is running point on that from our team, because I'm essentially doing all the program launch. So we're delegating different levels of authority. So I don't have all of the in the weeds information, other than it's going to be very similar to how the last RFPQ was launched, which is very low barrier, 4-page application packet, very large group of reviewers through the community. Essentially we'll be looking for reviewers that aren't applying, and trying to get a very diverse level of reviewers. Like our last review, we had people all the way down, and we had an indigenous provider in Arizona as a reviewer. So I mean, like, we had all kinds of flavors of reviewers to bring all kinds of different lenses to this review. And the great part about the RFPQ is it's not like an RFP where it's competitive. There's no competition. Like the bar for an RFPQ is, how do we get you in? we want to bring in providers. We're not screening out providers because they didn't hit a high enough level of a high enough score. So that's a kind of a unique thing that you don't see very often. That's pretty neat.
And that's great. Would it provide an opportunity, like, for example, let's say Clackamas Women's Services is applying specifically for Clackamas County.
Mhm.
If they get approved, would they be approved to apply for contracts in any of the 3 counties? Wow.
It's to create a tri-county partner list, which will be great, right? So, organizations that want to branch out and move around and bring specialized things to different counties will have that availability and that option within that. So they can choose to stay in their county, or they can say, we'd like to stay in Clackamas, but maybe in a year or 2, we'd like to move into Washington County to bring this specialized service. So it will make everything much more diverse.
Alex, in one of your earliest slides, you had those, the foundation and all of the plethora of programs and services that make up the Supportive Housing Services Initiative. Is there an inventory or a roadmap as to who's doing what in those services? Some kind of a diagram that kind of maps that out for us?
Yeah, not yet. It's being developed. I would say I'm hiring just like our providers to help with the infrastructure of building this out. Each piece of the puzzle, we're trying to be very, very strategic and very well thought out. So it isn't all developed yet because it's kind of getting put together a piece at a time. I would say right now we have a general view. Like, we know what we want to cover. We know all of the services to a certain extent that need to be provided, at least early on. But there will be pieces to this puzzle that we have not thought about that will need to be added over time. And we'll learn that as it gets built. We'll start to see where there's pitfalls and roadblocks and gaps in this system. And we'll all, I would say that we're just going to have to be flexible and pivot and adjust and create, new programming to fill those gaps over time.
Yeah.
I would say there is one caveat, which makes this all a little more fun. And that is the 25-75 funding split, where we can only spend 25% of all of these larger funds on the lower needs populations. So a lot of this design also has to be very strategic in that we're in alignment with our funder at Metro when we launch these programs. So
yeah,
it's a larger money puzzle.
Sure. It just seems, creating that directory, if you will, so that providers know who's doing what, and so that we have the opportunity to collaborate with each other. Because so much of this it's like all hands on deck, everybody's doing their own thing. But the most difficult thing that we have found in our experience, and that's why Thrives exists, is to bring our providers together so they can talk with each other, strategize together, figure out whether there are tactics that they can be working on together, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's why I was curious.
No, it's great, Glenn. I think, we want to, like, the hack, part of the hack is to centralize that level of accountability, but also like the Built for Zero meeting, right? Like, how can we adjust the Built for Zero meeting to be more encompassing of the larger provider network? And how can we have effective case conferencing and sharing of resources? Also, the beauty of the phased assessment is we will be able to put all of these resources in HMIS for connections, so that a case manager doesn't actually need to know every single resource that's available, because it will be automated in the system, and the system will basically say to a case manager, hey, your participant's eligible for A, B, C, D, E, and F. Would you like to access any of those things? Because I think one of the hardest things, I remember the Rainbow book, right? It was like this book that created all of these resources, but by the time you got into the book, half of them weren't funded anymore. There was new ones. So a lot of it's going to be automated, but I would say we also we're going to be building out provider pages on the Washington County website that incorporate all of these resources and have a centralized location where providers or the community can go to find out what's out there and available.
That's great. You also mentioned the HPAC as the governing body, and that you were looking for feedback in terms of decision-making, accountability, that kind of thing. I'm curious, who will ultimately be responsible for reporting on outcomes? And this is before your time, Alex, but there was, under the auspices of Washington County Thrives, there was a consulting team that created a recommendation report around permanent supportive housing. And that came out over a year ago. And it recommended a cross-jurisdictional governing body, something beyond HPAC, and something that included elected leaders who not only have decision-making authority, but can then hold their staff and jurisdictions accountable. And I don't know if that report has ever come across your desk, or if anybody on the staff has discussed that, or if when they decided that HPAC was going to be the de facto governing body, whether that was taken into account. Do you know anything about that, Alex?
I would say I don't.
Anybody on the hack? I mean, Rachel or anyone who was involved in the PSH report, any discussions about that? Or
well, I have to say, yes, I can think of things to say. I think I'll try to limit. I think we need to get our own ducks in a row before we can leave. I actually think that what Alex is doing and describing around this kind of tri-county effort to do services will help get us to what you're saying. But I'm excited to get more organized within Washington County on PSH and how it connects to the resources in the community. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we would want to do that before we would, step into the next place of working with, others. So I think it's a yes and let's, for example, the Homeless Policy Advisory Committee is looking at rewriting its bylaws at its next meeting to do to really include the work that we're talking about right now, which is really exciting. So there is a lot of moving parts. Yeah. And I think the conversation we'll have in 6 months, if we do everything as well as Alex is describing, will look really different.
Cool.
Did I stop sharing? I just want to make sure my desktop isn't just projected all over.
I stopped the sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Oh. That sounds like it could have been interesting, Alex.
Oh, it's a mess. Actually, it's just an embarrassing desktop with way too many open windows.
So in terms of the outcomes, Alex, is it the county that is ultimately reporting on outcomes, or is that being rolled up from providers? How is that going to happen?
The county will be putting out the outcomes. It'll be based off of the data is put in the HMIS, as well as the YARDI system through the Housing Authority. And then we're trying to create a level of alignment with our outcomes between our tri-county partners. I would say that based off of our reforming, though, our outcomes will probably be a little more comprehensive than what Multnomah and Clackamas County are putting out, especially when it comes to things like race and ethnicity and who we're serving. We're going to be way more comprehensive and in the weeds than they will be. Their goal is to be in alignment with us in about a year.
Okay. And when do you expect the initial outcomes to be released?
The report to Metro will be released. Will be going to the board on the 9th. And so that'll be the first round of outcomes. I would say that those outcomes are also, but will probably be much more heavily leaning towards capacity building provider networks and what's been allocated versus actual housing placements. Yeah. I'm hoping by the Q2 report, we'll have some nice traction with housing placements.
So it'll be a quarterly type of report back.
Yeah, that's being designed right now with the Tri-County partners as a template. That's a quarterly reporting template that will be released each quarter, and it'll be open, available to the general public. And the idea is to align dashboards on our website, so you don't have to read the whole narrative report. You can go just look at the pretty graphs and pictures and get a general idea of what's going on.
Great. Any other questions for Alex?
Alex, did you already speak to? I think it's the ARLA program. Is that using SHS funds?
Yeah, there was the ARLA is the 28% income voucher program for all higher needs households, as well as a caveat for anyone that's homeless over the age of 55. it was kind of decided that if you're over 55 and you're homeless, you need a voucher. We don't want our older adults. 55 is a lot older when you're on the streets. it's more like 65 or 70 when you're sleeping outside. So we will be. That's another prioritization for those vouchers. But yeah, there's over 500 available right now. It's just getting the boots on the ground.
Was there discussion? I think it's great that, if there's zero income, they don't have to pay a thing. Was there discussion about having a minimum income before that 28.5% kicked in? Because you gave an example of if somebody's got a $600 a month and they're going to pay 28.5% of that, or a $300 a month income. That still doesn't leave them a whole heck of a lot for all their other basic needs. So
yeah. So one of the neat things we did with these contracts for the HCMS case managers is we gave them a lot of flexible dollars, and those dollars can be used for almost anything really that somebody needs to retain their housing. So that could be, food, that could be transportation, that could be utilities, anything. I mean, as long as we're tracking it and documenting it and get a good feel. A lot of the funding assumptions this year were based off of very fragmented data. And so after about 6 months to a year, we'll be able to see if we're giving the providers exactly what they need to make sure our participants are stably housed and comfortable. So they have those flexible funds.
Great. Other questions or comments?
I'll comment that, Alex, it wasn't maybe 3 or 4 months ago, there was a lot of anxiety from this group of providers. And at least just speaking for myself, a few months later, I feel like a partner with SHS. So thanks for you and your team to sort of elevate the level of collaboration, partnership, and adapting programs to fit more of what the providers do well.
Thanks, Brian. I'm proud of that.
I'm great. Great. Others? Okay. Alex, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and you're welcome to stay on or hop off as you need to. So we will continue on with any other thoughts from folk. We don't have any other focus topics, but if there is someone who wants to chat about our 2 other priorities, whether it's workforce development or our early learning and youth enrichment, now would be the time to bring that up. And also I would, if there are specific topics or deeper dives that people would like to entertain in future all collaborative meetings, it would be great to get that feedback as well. The leadership team has been providing some guidance there and helping to craft the agendas, but you are the Thrive stakeholders. So if there are things that you want to be focused on, we would really like to hear that. So any other thoughts from folk?
And Glenn, if I may, Ricardo Palazuelos, Washington County. I wonder if this is a group into which I can bring some of the ideas that my division and Metro partners and regional partners, we're working on trying to, the education that we provide is based on solid data, from DEQ, from EPA, from the UN World Food Program, so far and so on. One of my goals for this coming fiscal year, which starts in 2022, we're creating curricula that is going to be, that we're trying to have our partners at school districts to accept as part of their CTE programs, career and technical education programs. We're trying to bring this as a means to understanding a path to green jobs. There's this training comes with data that is relevant to some of the programs with, for example, the specific university environmental program, education program. And we would like to have again, it's information right now. We're talking about it. We're trying to find this curricula to try to match it to ESSA, the Every Student Success Act. And I think I'd like to have a soundboard as to what are some of the barriers that could be overcome with support from the community. Also, what are some of the things that they see more pressing, rather than this huge overview of the climate problem, but rather something that could be done locally. And so I would like to see if that is an appropriate use of the time of the group. And if I could, once that we have more specific information, that we can bring it to the group, or perhaps put it as part of the agenda and still, 15, 20 minutes of one of the future meetings. I think it touches in a couple of these themes that you were mentioning at the beginning or just now.
Yeah.
And it's like we could have some specific projects for the students that are dedicated to CBOs in the region, or also how to work with our farming community and our migrant community as well. So
I'd love to get some reactions from folks if you think that is a worthwhile agenda topic in the future, and to have Rick back to talk, give a thumbs up or a hand wave or some indication that
or you can do it privately as the core group that you are. You don't need to
sure.
I have pretty thick skin. I don't get offended easily, but if you feel more comfortable in not telling me now, it's fine. I can get that information later.
Well, it seems to have potential in my mind, just tying in with workforce and other supportive services. So thank you for that, Rick. I'll make sure to incorporate that. We've got a few of our people here who are on the leadership team, so they are now on notice that that's something we can chat about. Anything else? Any other announcements that come to mind for folks that you didn't have a chance or didn't think about when we did our little check-ins in the beginning?
Well, Jenny's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's do Katie and then Bridget.
Sorry. Washington County Kids is sponsoring a panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any kind of questions that people might have about race and interactions, it should be very interesting. I will send information about it to Jenny to be in the newsletter.
Beautiful. Thank you, Katie.
And
Bridget?
that's November 10th, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, Jenny's invitation for the newsletter also pinged something in my head. We're having a storytelling event with youth speakers at Home Plate. It's called Front Porch Sessions. We're working with Chris Williams, and that's a virtual event on November 4th. I'm really excited about it. He's amazing and did like a workshop with our youth, and yeah, it's virtual, so easy to attend. November 4th. You can RSVP at our website. It's free to attend. So just want to put that out there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. It's been great seeing you all. Thanks for your engagement. Thanks for all that you do. And hope to see you again next month. Can't remember what the date is, but there will be a reminder. The third Wednesday. It's always the third Wednesday. Okay. Take good care, all.